I bloody love trees. But if you're a climate scientist, forests pose a really big problem, and one that's only getting worse. It's a problem that is fundamentally limiting our ability to predict the future of our climate. Trees are holding back our climate models. The problem is where they sit in the carbon cycle. Now, you've probably heard of the carbon cycle before, but let me give you a brief reminder. The element carbon exists in lots of different forms in lots of different places in the Earth's system. Most famously, there's a lot of carbon in the form of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere, and a lot more than there used to be. But there are other reservoirs of carbon. For example, in the shallow part of the ocean, carbon in the form of carbonic acid. In the deep ocean, in the terrestrial biosphere, that's carbon in the form of plants and in the soil, in permafrost, and mostly carbon locked up in rocks in deep geological storage. The carbon cycle refers to the flow of carbon between these different reservoirs. There's always transfer of carbon between, for example, the atmosphere and the shallow part of the ocean, between the biosphere and the atmosphere. And the reservoirs never totally stabilize in size. In fact, on long geological timescales, they're in constant flux. But on human timescales, this thing is in balance. Or at least, it would be. The root cause of the climate crisis is that we humans have been shifting fossil carbon from deep geological storage into the atmosphere really quickly, far faster than the natural rate. And of course, when there is more carbon in the atmosphere, other flows in the carbon cycle change. The ocean starts absorbing more carbon, making it more acidic. Plants feed on the extra carbon, growing a bit faster and producing more sugars. That has its own problems. Made a whole video about that. But these drawdown responses are slower than the human additions of carbon to the atmosphere, with the net result that carbon is accumulating in the atmosphere. And the more carbon there is in the atmosphere, the warmer the planet is. But how much extra carbon is being added to the atmosphere every year? On the one hand, because atmospheric CO2 concentrations have increased, forests are drawing down more carbon. But at the same time, humans have been chopping down lots of trees, especially in the tropics, and that reduces how much carbon is sucked down and straight up releases carbon into the atmosphere. The result is that we have no idea what the net flow of carbon into or out of forests is. The error bars are enormous.
The amount emitted to the atmosphere, we don't know that till within 65%. And then on the other side, the amount that's taken up, we don't know that till within 30%. Or it's actually slightly bigger than that. Because you don't know the numbers, you don't know the processes very well. So you don't even know what you're looking for to actually fix all this lot.
To reiterate, with a 65% error bar, if this was our best estimate for how much carbon the world's forests are emitting, then the real value is somewhere in this range. That's quite an error bar. And that's a real problem if you want to predict how CO2 levels, and so the planet's temperature, will evolve this century. We know that CO2 levels are rising, and that will be bad news, but without knowing what's going on with the world's forests, we are limited in our ability to predict how bad it is going to be. Now you may well ask, can't you just measure that carbon flow with a satellite? And the answer is no. The way scientists measure the net flow of carbon into or out of a tree is by repeatedly measuring its biomass, which is the mass of the tree minus the mass of water in the tree. And biomass is about 50% carbon. So if the amount of biomass in a tree is increasing, that means it is net absorbing carbon. While if it's decreasing, it's net emitting carbon. But what happens when you try to observe a tree from space? Well, the same thing that's happening to this camera. You can only see the leaves. And of all the biomass in a tree, only 1% is stored in the leaves. The vast majority is in the trunk and branches. So to get an accurate measurement of the net carbon flow into or out of the world's forests, you would need to repeatedly measure the individual trunks and branches of every tree on Earth. But surely that's impossible. Well, it used to be. Because Sean Queggan, this guy, has spent the last 20 years working on a new satellite called Biomass. And with some incredible engineering, Biomass is going to measure basically every tree on the planet, and then some. And just minutes before this interview, he watched that satellite launch. How are you feeling right now?
Well, I cried when it launched, actually, because it's been such a wait, and with huge relief. It's just hard to describe.
But here's the thing. Biomass does a load of stuff that's new. We've never seen a satellite like this before. And while we were doing this interview, we didn't know if it was working or not. A few weeks ago, I was invited by the European Space Agency to Darmstadt in Germany to watch Biomass launch. Darmstadt is where ESA has its Space Operations Centre, so where they control satellites in orbit, but also during launches and deployment, and they have missions looking at the Earth, looking at other planets, and looking at stars. I was given a tour around the site the day before the launch, including the control room, which was very cool, and then sat down with some of the scientists involved in the mission.
My name is Björn Romme. I'm a mission scientist at ESA.
Okay, my name is Liebe Jauregui, and I'm flight dynamics engineer for Earth observation missions.
I'm Christina. I work in Biomass as an SOE for power, thermal and RF.
And on a scale of 1 to 10, how nervous are you feeling about tomorrow?
I am very nervous about tomorrow. I'm part of the A shift, which is the shift that follows LEOP from 2 hours before launch until 10 hours after launch. So I'm very, very nervous about tomorrow.
Now, Biomass is not a normal satellite in lots of ways, but in particular, it looks weird. And its strangest feature, this umbrella, is what allows it to see the world's forests. This thing is a radar reflector, and it's a type that has never been flown in space before.
We're using a P-band radar. A radar is, of course, kind of an instrument that actually is able to send out a microwave signal, waiting for the reflection, is able to get information about what actually it sees. And by this, we're using a radar system called synthetic aperture radar, which is actually able to make images out of what we're seeing. So by this, we're able to get information of a certain area. We're looking at our planet.
Now, this itself isn't new. ESA have been flying synthetic aperture radar since 1991. What is new is the wavelength that radar is operating at. P-band, which is about 70 centimeters long. As a reminder, wavelength refers to how much space a single wave cycle takes up as it moves through space. So for this wave, a single wave cycle occupies this wavelength. So for P-band radar, this distance is 70 centimeters. P-band is a long wavelength of microwave. We've never had a radar system in low Earth orbit with such a long wavelength before. But why would you want to use such a long wavelength? It's to make certain objects invisible. You see, when you throw a wave, like a radio or microwave, at an object, if the object is larger than the wavelength of the wave, then the wave is reflected. It bounces off. But if the object is much smaller than the wavelength, then the wave just diffracts around the obstacle. It keeps on going. That means if you were looking for objects by emitting waves and then waiting to hear the reflection or the echo, then objects smaller than the wavelength you are using are just invisible to you. And what was the reason that we couldn't measure trees' biomass from space? The leaves. Leaves are typically centimeters or tens of centimeters across, and so if you were to fire a much longer wavelength, like say 70 centimeters, at a tree, then that signal would pass straight through the leaves, and it would bounce off the trunk and the branches.
The best sensitivity you get, of course, is objects that are about the size of the wavelength or larger. Let's say about a tenth of the wavelength. So in the case of biomass, let's say 7-10 centimeter upwards, we get a sensitivity to this. And for all the smaller things, you basically don't care, you don't see it. So we're able to penetrate really much better through the forests than other radar systems. And by this, we're getting a lot of information about structural elements that are actually scattering back information back to our spacecraft.
So by firing a long wavelength radar signal from orbit at a tree, you pick up a very faint echo that has bounced off the parts of the tree containing most of the biomass.
Once you fly over for the second time with roughly the same geometry of the same area, you can do a process which we call SAR interferometry. So then we can actually overlay these two images, and then suddenly the phase is telling us, giving us information of what is either sometimes either to change what's happening if you're really in exactly the same orbit, or when you're using a slightly different orbit, what we're doing in biomass, then you get a kind of a parallax. And by this you can get the information about the height. So you get the information about what's ongoing there. So this is how we use interferometry.
And by repeating this measurement several times, the mission is expected to last 5 years after it's been calibrated, we can measure how the store of carbon in the world's forests is changing, and so what the net carbon flux is into or out of these forests. And that is going to make our models of future climate change more accurate, fixing the largest uncertainty in the carbon cycle. And as if that wasn't enough, we can also use this data, which will be available to everyone, to also look at the topography, the lay of the land, underneath forest cover for the first time, as well as the land underneath deserts and the internals of ice sheets. ESA have some interesting web pages up about these different uses, they're linked below. So if this is such a good idea, and we've been doing this kind of thing for a while, why have we only just decided to launch this mission?
Up until 2004, it was not allowed by the International Telecommunications Union, who allot the frequencies. And the reason is because that frequency is used by what the US Department of Defense space object tracking radars. But then in 2004, the ITU gave us this frequency because we knew then that this frequency would allow us to look at forests. So we still can't operate within line of sight of those radars. Everywhere else in the tropics, over Siberia and the whole southern hemisphere, we can look at forests.
So as we were shepherded into the press room to watch the launch, 20 years of work were riding on top of a Vega C rocket in Kourou, French Guiana, which is incidentally the place with the highest number of trees per person on Earth. So kind of perfect place to launch the biomass mission. And yet, when the rocket took off, flawlessly, there was silence in the room. It turns out there's a superstition here around clapping after launch. It's considered bad luck to clap before the first signal is received from the satellite. And that can take a while.
After liftoff, there is quite a long waiting time in which the spacecraft is just inside of the rocket. And then around 1 hour after launch, the spacecraft separates from the launcher. And at that point, it starts an auto sequence in which it will deploy the solar array. After the solar array deployment, or let's say during this auto sequence, the spacecraft will also switch on its transponder, so that we can communicate with the spacecraft.
And it was in this limbo, after launch but before signal was acquired, that I talked to Sean, who was waiting to hear if 20 years of his life were about to come to nothing.
Not many people are in my position ever, and so it's hard to pull down some feelings from someone else. It's just, yeah, I'm confused.
This mission saw lots and lots of humans from around the world pour their collective energies into a project that will hopefully allow us to make better decisions around climate, that will hopefully make our collective futures better. During our tour, we stumbled across the Biomass team having group photos being taken like it was a wedding, and they were this big family coming together. They even had custom umbrellas made to commemorate the occasion. This mission involved over 700 people from 20 countries, including the UK, the USA, and Canada. Some of these people were in French Guiana.
But all the rest of the science team are here, and I've been traveling with them for 20 years. So for me, it's just the right place to be, and I'm so happy that they're almost all here.
And despite this being one of the most sophisticated Earth observation satellites ever, and it's built upon all this engineering and all these simulations, that human aspect was everywhere. Like, there were good luck cards everywhere and Lego models of the satellite on people's desks. And then there were all the superstitions, like not clapping when the rocket takes off.
I am a little bit superstitious. There were some open umbrellas today inside that made me a bit nervous because I'm Italian, and for us it's a big no-no.
This mission saw lots of humans from all around the world pour their collective energies into a project that will hopefully make us make better decisions around climate, that will hopefully make our collective futures better.
The aspiration is, of course, that the data will be able to be used for trying to respond to the current ongoing crisis and trying to really answer to our main science question.
So what we will get from this mission is, if you like, hopefully a consistent, unbiased, impartial estimate and measurement of biomass that they can use in thinking about their forests and then managing them to the benefit of their own economies and for the world's climate.
Which made it all the sweeter when... Fortunately, the satellite was working just fine. And since getting back from my trip, the long and complicated process of deploying the radar reflector was completed successfully. But we're still a way off getting that incredible data. It will take some time to collect. And there's also the chance that something just goes wrong. I mean, we've never flown a satellite that looks like this in low Earth orbit before. We don't really know how it's going to respond to the small amount of atmospheric drag that still exists at that altitude.
So we have some numbers and predictions on how our satellite is going to behave once in orbit, which is the drag that it's going to experience, what is the solar radiation and so on, but we need to see whether this corresponds to reality. I think the open question is that until you have it in flight, you don't know how this is going to impact. No? And we have this mess, this kind of membrane, that we don't know how much it's going to be dragging or not.
And then, of course, there's the very real possibility that when the data comes in, it will reveal the terrestrial carbon sink to be in much worse shape than we first thought, and that we'll have to adjust our projections of the climate this century to be that bit warmer. And if I'm honest, the older I get, the more science feels like this race for survival. Like, especially for us Earth scientists, it feels like we are trying to get the data and do the analysis that will either make or break civilization. But that's not how science used to feel. When I first became interested in science, it felt like anything was possible. It felt like Star Trek, learning more about the universe in order to learn more about ourselves. And most importantly, doing that in a spirit of cooperation and optimism. My experience with biomass made me feel that way again. This was the type of science that I fell in love with, a collective mission of hope, and one that will hopefully help us take better care of these things. Now, I have a slightly embarrassing confession to make. For the past several years, I have been rewatching Star Trek. I started with the start of The Next Generation, watched all of that, all of Deep Space Nine, all of Voyager, and now I'm on Enterprise. If you're not familiar, Enterprise is not the most popular of Star Trek series, and that's because it's just not good, especially season 1, which I just finished.
Captain, I grew arm nipples.
And I watch on Netflix, and I'm able to do that because UK Netflix has all of those Star Trek series. If you live in America, my apologies, then your Netflix doesn't have Star Trek. Or, for that matter, at the time of recording, It's Always Sunny, The Office, Yellowstone, or every Studio Ghibli film. However, you're still able to watch T'Pol walking out of a series of rooms and Archer being a bad captain by changing your location to the UK. And no, I don't mean by transporter. I mean by changing your virtual location to the UK, courtesy of the lightning-fast browser extension from NordVPN, who have kindly sponsored this video. Using a VPN, you can tell websites that you are somewhere you are not, and that allows you to use location-specific services. For example, you can book hotels and hire cars for an international trip using local rates, which are often cheaper than rates for international customers. And you can access other countries' content libraries on services like Netflix. So for example, here in the UK, I can change my location to the US and watch American Netflix, and that gives me the ability to, for example, watch the Dungeons and Dragons movie, which isn't on UK Netflix. I'd argue that the ability to set your virtual location like this is just one of those essential tools for using the internet, especially if you travel a bunch for work, like I do. And Nord's proxy extension is the gold standard for this. It's lightweight, fast, customizable, and doesn't track your browsing history. If you want to get a VPN, you should get Nord. And if you get a 2-year plan at nordvpn.com/Simon Clark, then you get an exclusive 4 months extra completely for free. Plus, if you decide that you don't like the service within the first 30 days, then you can get your money back, no questions asked. So there's no risk to just giving this a go. That link again was nordvpn.com/Simon Clark. With thanks to Nord for sponsoring this video and for helping Star Trek nerds everywhere. Thank you so much for watching the video and for allowing me another opportunity to do some modeling. Also, thank you so much to Isa for inviting me to Darmstadt. I had a fantastic time. I actually vlogged the entire trip, which is available to watch as part of the monthly behind the scenes vlog that I make over on Patreon. Patreon.com/SimonOxFizz is the #1 way I support doing this job. And if it wasn't for my patrons, I wouldn't be able to make videos full time. So if you'd like to help me make more and bigger, better videos, then that's the place to do it. And in exchange, you get early access to videos, access to a big library of exclusive content, and at producer tier and higher get to vote on a video topic. So if that sounds good, patreon.com/SimonOxFizz. With a special thank you to Simon H., Andreas Riff, and Thomas Sate. If you'd like to watch something else from me, then here's 2 videos I prepared earlier. If you'd like this video, then please do the YouTube pleasantries, drop a like, subscribe, you know, that kind of thing. And that just leaves me to say thank you again for watching. I'll see you in the next one.